Welcome to a very special edition of the Remedial Film Class podcast. I'm your host, Dan.
And I'm Travis.
I'm George.
And I'm Troy Howarth.
Hey, Troy's here.
Hey, Troy.
We brought Troy along today. We burned up a lot of favors to get him here because we are finally making George watch The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And Troy, it seems you might have a special interest in all things Argento. Would you agree?
Vaguely, I suppose you could say that.
How many pages is your book on Argento that you just released?
How many pages? I guess around 430.
It's a hefty volume, a hefty tome. I much appreciated
vaguely interested in Argento, just a little bit.
Just a hobby.
Just a tad.
Now, if people recognize your voice, Troy, where have they heard you before?
Probably on the police scanner or many audio commentaries. As of last count, over 100. So for various different labels and different types of films, but especially, I guess, what you would call European cult movies.
Now, one of my favorite commentaries of yours is actually for this movie that we're going to be talking about today. So no pressure to George and Travis, but Troy said the funniest thing I've ever heard on an audio commentary in the middle of Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Do you remember me telling you what that was, Troy?
Jesus Christ, look at those glasses.
Oh, that's the one. He's playing all the hits, guys. Oh, man. I'm going to fanboy out for just a second, then I'm going to return to form. Okay, I'm back.
And scene.
So, unlike our standard format, because everything's being thrown into chaos tonight, we've already had George and Travis watch The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. But as a special bonus, we also had them both watch Blood and Black Lace, directed by Mario Bava. The first Giallo, in a lot of ways. Debatable, but most people point to that as at least, I would say, the signpost at the beginning of Giallo Town. Would you agree, Troy?
Well, yes and no. It's the first body count one, definitely. I'd say the first one was Bava's previous movie, The Girl Who Knew Too Much. But I suspect most people would really more readily identify Blood and Black Lace because it's the first one that has the killer dressed up in the black trench coat and the fedora with the mask and the black gloves and killing off all the beautiful women in stylized ways. So, yeah, that's the template, I think.
It's always very difficult to pin something down in this genre to a singular event. So I don't even know if we agree to disagree. I think we are both right. If you, depending on how we frame it, right? Evil Eye, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, Bava's first Giallo. But there were mysteries before that. When do they become Giallo, right? So,
yeah,
it's,
definitely.
It's a shifting thing. A shifting definition of what a Giallo is. Now, luckily, most of our audience has heard me ramble on about these enough that that's probably enough context to get us rolling. Our Friday the 13th fall break last year, where we made George watch every Friday the 13th movie and many movies that went along with the Friday the 13th movies, like A Bay of Blood and The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I think he about strangled me for making him watch all those, and I think I broke. Ruined Travis's life, showing Travis that some of his favorite ideas were actually not that unique after all.
Yes.
So, I think I'm going to get billed for Travis's therapy on that. I'm very sorry, sir.
I am basically an Italian movie virgin, so it was all a surprise to me when I started seeing all that stuff. Not anymore.
Cherry pop. So let's begin, George. First impressions of Bird with the Crystal Plumage on its own. You've had a lot of lead up to it. Did it meet your expectations, or did I oversell it?
Honestly,
Maybe.
I have no idea why this movie is important.
That's why we're here.
But I guess I'm gonna learn that. Hey, listen. It's my job to be stupid on this podcast.
This is true. He is the student.
I'm gonna do that.
You're doing the thing, bro. You're doing the thing.
Do you guys want my notes?
Let's hear your. Are they funny notes? Are we gonna laugh when you go through the notes?
Well, I didn't.
Troy already left. He's like, all right.
There was. Okay. Some of them are funny, some of them are not. Okay, first note, I think it's like 10 minutes into the movie, not even. It's always a maniac. There's always a maniac running around.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
In these Italian movies, it's always a maniac. All right. Hold on. Someone tries to kill you in the street. There's an old lady who witnesses it, and you don't call the police?
Okay.
Right? Okay. Flashback scene. I noticed that the victim on the floor of the gallery, 10 feet from the door, no blood on her stomach in the flashback. I don't know if that was done purposely or not.
That's a continuity error.
Okay.
Or a camera angle error. It's probably there. I doubt they did enough coverage that they would have had certain shots with new costumes.
It's definitely not there.
It's not there. Okay.
Go on.
Pervert lineup? Okay. Thought I was going to see Fenster. Does everybody know who Fenster is?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I do not know.
My favorite character from The Usual Suspects?
Yes.
When they're in the lineup and he's the one that says, give me the keys, you cocksucker. What the fuck? Anyway. Okay.
Was it Del Toro, I think?
Yeah, Benicio del Toro. Police Lab reminds me of the nerdy science chick from NCIS. You know, the one with the black hair and the studded collar and the combat boots? You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay.
I'm aware. Yeah.
Like through science, like tells you like exactly where this fiber came from, like from this like.
There's always one that has it all.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, all the information.
Like this hair came from a camel that only exists. Forget it.
That appeared with the Magi. Yeah, it's
right.
like she has like all the insight. She's the Cliff Clavin of the science department. Yeah.
Antique shop owner is a close talker. Reminds me of the bartender that remembers everything from Law and Order.
Okay.
You guys know what I'm talking about?
The one that they always find who's like, oh, yes, the woman. She walked in. Yeah. She was 5'10". She was wearing a blue shirt. I think she went to high school with my sister.
There was a lot of that at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
A lot of that. Like, did you see the blonde woman? And it's like, oh, you mean the one that her name is this? And like they had all this information. Oh, she's right there. I was like, wait, what?
I like it. Well, I mean, I probably shouldn't do my New York accent, but I'm going to.
Oh, New York accent. No.
Yeah, he was in here. Yeah, I know him. He was a blah, 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 blah guy. Yeah, did that. All right. Okay. Anyways,
sorry
moving
to
on.
our New York listeners.
Or not sorry.
Or not so many.
Okay, so next kill scene, that's what you wear to bed? Cool.
You got him in mid-drink on that one. That's good.
And then skip a few. Worst, most conspicuous hitman ever. And then he ends up not being so conspicuous.
Right.
Interesting. But for a minute there, he was very conspicuous.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now, fast forward to the end. No, well, kind of the end.
Okay.
I don't know how much of this you want me to spoil or not.
Hey, audience, we're not going to let George spoil it for you. If he says anything spoilery, I'm going to bleep him like he just talked about. Now I'm gonna have to bleep that out. Okay, go ahead.
I don't know how we can talk about this movie without talking about the end.
Right.
Anyway, I'm gonna go for it.
He's all in.
The scene. It's actually right before the end. The scene where the friend, I believe his name is Carlo, is in the apartment, and Sam just like starts like getting it on with his girlfriend while he's in the room, and he's. Kind of like, all right, well, I guess I should just leave. Can I take this tape? I'm thinking at this time, okay, well, that was a bit on the nose. The buddy recognizes the sound on the tape because he's a writer of books about rare birds. It's obviously a bird call. He's sitting there smoking a cigar. Boom. Right? Connect that to the detective in the lab, and, the guy's left-handed. He smokes cigars. He, blah blah blah. He recognizes the bird call. So like, and then he wants to take the tape. So like, they're obviously setting it up for you that here's your guy. It's right in front of you, which is what makes me so angry about the end.
Because they threw a curve.
You didn't like the curve?
Well, there was multiple curves.
It was twisty.
I suppose
it was twisty.
I suppose my biggest problem with the curves was that how like in like a Shyamalan film the curve is there the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't recognize it. It's right in front of your face, but you don't see it. Maybe I'm dumb, but these curves were not foreshadowed at all.
They just out of the blue.
Yeah, just out of the blue. Last 20 minutes were just roller coaster. It almost made like the first hour and 20 kind of like, why did I even watch the first hour and 20? There was nothing that connected all this.
Well, I'm looking forward to the schooling of this.
Yeah, me too.
It sounds like we've got a case of RoboCop here, Troy, where when we made George watch RoboCop, he hated every minute of it. And by the end of the podcast, he was part of Team RoboCop, I dare say.
He was at least in the station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was at least...
He was in the same book.
Yeah, he
with
had
us.
some stock in OCP. He may not have been in charge of the company yet, but...
At the beginning, he was outside the library sitting on a bench. And by the time we were done talking to him, he was at least in the same book with us. He wasn't fully in love, but he at least got it.
He at least got on the bus.
Yeah, he was on there.
Yeah.
So, one of the reasons, George and Travis, I had you watch Blood and Black Lace. And we're going to spoil that one here because we have to for the sake of this conversation. Did you catch that at the end of Blood and Black Lace, they basically pull a Die Hard on you? You think the whole time that you're dealing with a psycho, sexual, deviant serial killer. And then it all just pretty much turns into a bank robbery at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, oh, these aren't terrorists. This is something different. So, what I want you to understand about Giallo up until this point, and Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't correct me too hard because that'll hurt. But before Bird, most Jolly, the sexy ones, the violent ones, the Bava ones, the Lindsay ones, everybody, they all boil down to human greed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically, Bava's films weren't really dealing so much with the psychosexual type of serial killer type thing. It usually, as you say, it boiled down to some elaborate plot which had something to do with a more prosaic kind of a crime, but ultimately the real motivator is greed. And the same thing with all the sexy gialli that came out in the late 60s prior to Argento. They were all basically predicated on that idea that people were just basically really scummy and backstabbing and will do anything to get their hands on some desirable property or some, fortune or what have you. So, yeah, that was definitely pretty much the case before Argento came onto the scene.
So when we talked about Halloween, one of the things you guys discussed was that George was not shocked or surprised that he could get up from bullet wounds because he knows, having seen reference to 80s slasher movies, that the killer's always invulnerable. And I told you that before Halloween, that really wasn't the case. And you were like, oh, so my expectations were based on stuff that was, same thing here. Up until Argento, up until this movie, you're always waiting as an audience for the reveal of who is actually behind all this and where's the money, follow the money, now we find the culprit. And for the first time since Psycho, and in a much more amplified way, there really isn't a reason other than...
Yeah, so hold on. I was going to ask that, all this conversation leading up to it. Obviously, the reason why this one is special is because it's just a maniac. It really is a maniac. It's someone with a psycho issues, problem. Right.
It's the classic situation of finding a movie to be cliched, not realizing that it's the movie that helped to set the cliche. So when it came out in 1970, it was not a cliche.
Right.
Now, when did Psycho come out? Because I noticed
61, I think.
Okay, because I noticed
60.
they did
60.
They did a similar thing here. At the end of Psycho, they have
explain the plot.
Well, they explain.
They get the psychiatrist in to basically explain everything.
Forensic explanation.
Exactly. There was a very similar scene at the end here.
Yeah. Also, when Sam's walking up the steps, I completely saw the investigator walking up the Bates home steps. It was almost like a Spielberg dolly zoom but they didn't do that. But it had that feel because the camera was going up the steps as he was going up the steps, and I totally had that feeling of when he was going. Same with Amityville Horror. There's a lot of movies that did that up the steps kind of shot. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, he got that from Psycho, definitely.
Well, yeah, and it's disconnected to this film, but it's a typical, because Argento was a film critic before he became a director, and years later he made a film in Pittsburgh, actually, with George Romero called Two Evil Eyes. It was an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, and he had Martin Balsam, who played that character in Psycho, in the film, and he has a staircase where he's starting to go up the stairs, and you think, oh no, he's going to get stabbed again. So it's kind of a nice little tip of the hat, I guess.
Now, did he become typecasted as the guy to go up the steps all the time?
Well,
it's like,
he did definitely spoof that at least once or twice in his life.
That's funny. I was getting, I mean, I'm a student to these kind of movies too, and I think I understand where George is coming from because I have a lot of movie references, a lot of like American movie references, but I don't have any reference for these foreign films. So when I watch them, my biggest pet peeve is acting. Like I just have heart. That's my biggest thing.
The acting in this one was so good though.
And I'm watching, and it's just, and I remember in the 70s there was a lot of movies where everything is just, especially like with Hammer films too, it's overacting.
Oh, you're losing me. You're losing me. You're losing me.
On purpose. No, it's not on purpose. Like it's almost like it's exaggerated
stage acting.
It's almost like stage acting on camera.
No, I don't find it that way personally.
Okay.
I think when it comes to the Italian films, though, to get back to those, I think the problem is it's not so much the acting, it's the dubbing, which creates a little bit of it's a barrier that's difficult to cross. And it was tough for me when I first started watching these films. I can remember when I was little, when I first started seeing some of these movies, the artificiality of the dubbing, there's a disconnect that was very, very tough for me to get over for a long time. I remember when I first saw this film back, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s, I had much the same reaction. I thought, it's overacted, or the acting. And it's funny because now when I watch it, I think the dubbing on it is so good. I think because the dubbing later, funnily enough, in some of the later movies that came out in the 90s and beyond, the quality went really, really downhill. The funny thing with this one is that the same vocal actor does most of the voices in the film, apart from Tony Musante, who plays Sam, who dubbed himself, and Susie Kendall, who plays his girlfriend, who has pretty much a nothing role in the movie. Everybody else is dubbed by other actors, and the actor, voice actor named Robert Rietti, dubbed most of the characters, putting on various different types of accents. So I can definitely understand why, if you're not accustomed to it, it's going to be jarring, and it takes a while to get used to that.
I can totally agree with that, and I assume that's what it was, because the performances are there facially, visually, their movements and stuff. But yes, it is jarring to hear it and see it. It's almost like when my wife flips out whenever we watch something on Netflix and the lips don't match up just a little bit. She's got to turn the TV off. She's like, the lips aren't matching, and it's almost like the same thing there.
It's tough, and it wasn't just, I should clarify this too, it wasn't just the low-budget movies that were like this. The big films too, Italian films in general, were dubbed. And that had a lot to do with practical concerns. After World War II, the sound stages had been sort of bombed out and so forth. There really wasn't much in the way of soundproofing. And in order to get some of the really extravagant camera movements and things like that they got, they just didn't worry about recording a direct soundtrack, and they would just dub it in later.
Right.
Yeah, so
it's an
like
art.
the
It's an art
Sergio
form.
Leone westerns, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and things like that. Same thing.
Right.
And if you're not used to that, it's definitely very jarring. So I can't fault anybody for finding that to be a problem, because I do think it's something you have to kind of work at. If you're interested in the films and decide to keep coming back to them, it's worth doing that. But some people just can't get past that, and I can understand that.
I in my defense, I think, because I watched it twice. The first time it was definitely like a wow, whoa. Second time I watched it, I knew what I was watching, so I could pay attention more and kind of look past some things.
Yeah.
So
I have a quick question for you, Troy. Did you say that the entire thing is dubbed in both languages?
Oh yes, in any languages. I'll give you an example. Again, this is not just the low budget stuff. A director like Fellini, who is regarded as one of the great filmmakers of all time, he would often cast amateurs who weren't actors because they had interesting faces, and he would literally tell them, count, turn your head here and then say 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just going to dub it in like every language. So a lot of the genre stuff was really geared, and that includes the Westerns too. They were geared towards an English language audience because they figured they would make more money that way. So they would often shoot them in English. Most of the actors in Bird are actually speaking English, but they're being dubbed later on. So Tony Musante, for example, he's, his lip movements match and everything. He's speaking the lines that he spoke on set, whereas some of the other actors perhaps might have been speaking in Italian, and they find a way to kind of sync things up and match them up. But if you're not used to that, if you notice that it get a little loose at times and the movements don't always match up, I think of some of the supporting characters like the guy in the antique shop, for example, who's a German actor. I can see where, if you're not used to that, you might be watching and say, what the hell is this? I'm used to it. So to me, it's not a problem. Right. I find it very, it's almost normal to me at this point. At the same time, it drives me nuts when people talk about, you should watch it in the original Italian. It's not, many of them weren't really shot in Italian, and they're also dubbed as well. So it really depends. We mentioned Blood and Black Lace before. That's a movie that I think works much better in Italian because the English dub on that I think is very wooden. But Bird with Crystal Plumage, I watch that in English every single time.
And Deep Red is very much the same. The Deep Red and Tenebrae both have fantastic English dubs. I never hesitate to recommend, because when you're first bringing new people into this kind of genre, that is something you have to address up front. They're going to look like they're speaking English and it looks like the sound is off, but just go with it. It'll be fine, right?
And I don't like reading during the movie because I like watching performances. So, I'll watch their face and I'm like, wait, what did they say? So then I'll have to go back. So I kind of, when Dan was saying, you got to watch this, I always say, is there an English track? Because I don't want to read.
It depends. It depends on the film. Some of the early Bava films do work better in Italian for me. Whereas some of them are perfectly fine in English, and especially when they had English or American actors in them who were, providing their own voices, like Telly Savalas and Lisa and the Devil, for example. It's always a little weird when you watch a familiar actor in a movie where he's dubbed by somebody else, and that could be a little jarring too. But again, that's something there's a lot in these movies, and a lot of the things that were being brought up as far as George's issues with aspects of the film. A lot of them. A lot of it really does come down to you just kind of have to go with it with these movies and not overthink certain things. Because
that's his problem.
That's a mistake I make on a regular basis.
Well, and it's not. Believe me, you're not unique in that by any means. Many people do that, and it's one of the reasons the Giallo films. A lot of people who are really into classical murder mysteries hate Gialli because very often they cheat. And very often they don't make logical sense. I've often said they make emotional sense because they're going for a very specific effect that if you just get on board with it and go with it, it really plays out in a really cool way. But if you sit there and think, would somebody really do that in reality? Hell no. So if you start getting bent out of shape about things like that, they're not going to work for you. And again, that's something that you either, if you're eager to get into these films and want to explore them more, that's something that you kind of get used to, or you just don't, and you just say, you know what, these movies aren't for me.
And go ahead.
Yeah, like for example, I'm watching the movie with my wife, and she keeps asking, "Why is he getting involved in this murder mystery case? Yeah. Why are the cops letting him do it?" I was like, just go with it. It's the movie. Like
you mentioned before about the police, and that's a funny thing because Hitchcock did that a lot too. Hitchcock said the characters in my movies don't call the police because the police are boring. And that was very often true with Argento as well. Although Argento does have in this film, probably my favorite character in the movie is the inspector.
Yes.
Who I think is actually depicted as pretty darn good at his job. And he's kind of wryly funny, and a very good performance from an Italian actor, a very distinguished Italian actor and director named Enrico Maria Salerno. I really like him in that role, and I think he steals quite a few scenes.
Yes.
And that's an unusually good policeman character in one of these movies. Very often when you see the police in these movies, you're like, oh, can we get it? And Blood and Black Lace is a perfect example. I adore that film. I have really, I think it's a phenomenal film. But the police are deliberately depicted as boring in that movie because we kind of want to get away from the police and get back to the really cool stuff. So that's, very often in these movies, it's true. The amateur detective in these movies is very often throwing himself into a situation that he should not be doing. And it's like, why is he doing this? Well, because it's in the script. That's pretty much why.
Yeah, don't ask. Just go with it.
That was when I watched Blood and Black Lace, I had a Knives Out kind of feel, or even Clue, the movie Clue. So it's like I had the frame of reference American-wise to understand why they were doing what they were doing and enjoying all the character development and the interaction and the puzzles and the pieces and everybody being targeted as the killer, and they're doing it on purpose. The scenes are cut just right. Oh, this person's coming out of that door. Well, they obviously did something. She's standing by the car. She obviously did something. But they're just playing with your what I call it your Georgism. Your thought of what's going on. I'm assuming this is happening because that's what I would do, and then they totally flip it on you. So I enjoy that.
There's always the red herring close-ups of people looking shifty for no real reason.
So much side eye.
It's part of the fun.
That was the thing, like the long glares. And I think in Blood and Black Lace, the first guy that you meet is the boyfriend of the girl, and I'm like, how did Nicolas Cage get in this movie? Like, he was just totally like Nicolas Cage's doppelganger, and he's even doing the facial over exaggerations and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, he's going to be the close-up guy of this movie. And then before I knew it, every guy was the close-up guy in this movie. It was like, I was waiting for the music, like every time they look and they do this like stare. And I'm like, they're just trying to make you think everybody's killing everybody. And then at the end, it's just I love what do you call it? Yeah, bank heist.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And that, as we were saying before, that was kind of typical of the Italian thrillers before Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is what really kind of introduced the idea of the psychopath. So yeah, nowadays, looking at it in the year 2021, you've seen this 1,000 times before, and you might be like, what's so special? But if you put it into context of viewers going to see the film in 1970, it was a very different story.
Now, one thing I think would blow Travis's mind, because Travis has a background in theater and acting. Troy, can you talk about the Tower of Babel aspects of making an Italian movie in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I mean, it was total. It was a beautiful period in the sense that a lot of it came out of the fact that a lot of the American studios were going over to Italy and Spain to make films because they had all these wonderful locations and scenery that were, you didn't have to build a ton of sets. You could go on location to Rome and find all these wonderful palazzos and villas. And I mean, it was just extraordinary. All these Italian Westerns, which funnily enough, most of them weren't shot in Italy. They were mostly shot in Spain, various different places that kind of vaguely looked a little bit like the, kind of the borderland area around Texas, Mexico and so forth. So there was a lot of money that was flowing through big American productions that were going over there, like Ben-Hur and Cleopatra. And there was a ton of Italian craftspeople who were extraordinarily talented, very, very good at making films that looked great. Even if you don't like these films, very often most people will at least say, well, it was really well photographed. I mean, that's a given because they had the best technicians in the world. And because there was so much productivity and so much was being churned out, you could get really phenomenal craftspeople working on little low-budget movies for a couple of weeks before they went off and made the big super production that was over there that was going to, either an American film or a big Visconti production like The Leopard, for example, the big multi-million-dollar type epic type of scenario. So, I mean, it was just an extraordinary run of creative people that were running amok really in Italy at that time, making films. They were very also a lot of fun to make because the attitude was very relaxed compared to what it was in Hollywood. Because they weren't that fussed about sound recording. For example, there was the director Ricardo Freda would very often have his dogs with him on the set. And Brett Halsey, who appeared in some of his films, told me that it took a lot of getting used to, having come from America, working at Universal, to going and being on a soundstage where this director's dog is howling all the time because of all the noise the camera is making. And you have to give a performance. And then eventually you realize, you know what, I can do it. Everybody got used to it and pitched in. There's the running joke in a great Billy Wilder comedy from the 70s that was shot in Italy called Avanti. A movie stars Jack Lemmon. I highly recommend it. Very funny movie. And there's this running joke about lunch. We're on lunch. And, well, how long? Oh, 2 or 3 hours. We like to make our pasta and drink our wine, make love to our women, and like, Jesus Christ. So it was like that. It was very much like that, and very relaxed kind of an attitude, very improvisational. Bava very famously on at least a couple of occasions gathered his crew on the first day of filming and held up the script and said, "Do you see this?" And then he threw it to the ground and said, "We're not going to pay attention to this piece of shit." And he would just improvise something. And he came up with wonderful things. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers that or not. It's just it was this extraordinary period.
That Bava anecdote, I mean, $5 for an August moon makes more sense. Mm-hmm. A lot more sense.
We used to have a director when people couldn't get off book. And he'd be like a month in the rehearsal and they're still reading every line in the script. The director would just say, "Leave your scripts at home. You know the character. We're just going to play." It gets people used to, and then you start knowing who you are and why you're saying what you're saying in your own words.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then you go back to the script and figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, there are different approaches. I mentioned Billy Wilder. So, I mean, he, of course, was very famously not just a director, but he was a great screenwriter. And he was very particular that every line be said exactly as written. If a single word was changed, he would say, "No, I spent months getting this just right. I don't want you changing it," which is fine when you watch his movies and you realize, okay, yeah, I don't think you could have improved on that. Whereas directors like Bava very often said, "This script isn't so hot. We can do better. Let's make something up as we go along." And sometimes, the seams sort of show. $5 for an August moon is a good example where the plot doesn't quite come together because it was sort of ad-libbed and, not all the I's are dotted, not all the T's are crossed, but, it's still pretty wonderful. So you can forgive it.
I might like $5 better than Lisa and the Devil. Is that a sin? I feel like that's a sin.
That is a sin, but I do love the film, so I'll forgive you.
Okay, good. Also, the end of Bay of Blood. I always thought, man, they were just on set and like, how do we put a final note on this? Hey, we got this scary-looking kid. Why don't we give him a gun and make fun of America? Yeah. Oh,
yeah. It pretty much was. It pretty much was a little bit of an ad lib, which is wonderful.
Yeah, we actually we didn't watch Bay of Blood. We watched clips of Bay of Blood in long form on the podcast because they just before we did any more Friday the 13th, they just had to know, especially Travis, who's such a fan of Part 2. I think it's in your top 2 or 3, right, Travis?
Yeah.
And it's my favorite.
Definitely.
But just seeing that and then juxtaposing it with The Town That Dreaded Sundown and being like, man, they just like averaged these two films together and out came Friday Part 2 and it was great and we love it. But
being an artist, I enjoy inspiration. I when I see it, I'm good with it. But when it's plagiarism, I hate it. But when it's an homage, I'm good. Or if it's lifted, it's fine. If it's done well.
If you're going to steal from the best.
And steal it right. And do it right.
I'm sure you know the story that Bay of Blood was released in America at one point as Last House on the Left Part 2.
Yes, we talked about
the same company that put out Last House on the Left. And, of course, that's a company that Sean Cunningham had a hand in. I'm sure he was aware of it. He said he never saw it at that time. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But, yeah, there's some similarities, but I enjoy them on their own merits, in different ways. Bava's film's a black comedy. The Friday the 13th movies aren't really black comedies as such. Although Part 5 is all kinds of funny, and I'm very fond of it.
Yeah, I watched Savage Streets this week just because I heard more Danny Steinman was on Blu-ray, so I had to venture down that path. And my goodness, that man,
he was something.
He
I
made
like
every
Part
film
5.
count.
I really do.
Oh, we're big fans. Well, at least I'm a big fan. I don't know about these guys.
I love 5 for what
it's
it
the
is.
It's the Halloween 3 of the series. It's the one that actually dared to do something different. And everybody hates it, but I like it.
Not everybody.
Now,
it's one of my favorite masks, and it's exactly what George was talking about. It's so blatantly in your face the whole time that that's not Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God!
Like
well, look at
from the get-go.
Yeah.
Look at all those lingering close-ups of the creepy ambulance EMT.
Right.
You know, it's there. It's right in your face. I think that's the thing too. Is what pisses some people off is they don't realize, until it's done that they've been had, and then they get bent out of shape. Well, I mean, you fell for it.
Yeah. That's how I felt when I saw Sixth Sense.
I'm going to give George a lot of homework, I think, throughout this episode. And one thing you need to do, George, watch the opening scene of this movie again. Because I want you to see that they do not cheat. Everything you needed to catch on to how this movie was going to go is available to you in that opening murder scene. But you just have to be looking for it. And you weren't looking for it the first time. Some of these movies do cheat. And some of them get
some of them, yeah,
so close to the line.
Which murder's the first murder?
In Behind the Glass, in the art gallery.
Well, it opens with the killer is sort of stalking the one victim that we don't see getting killed.
Right.
And then from there, it ends up with Sam witnessing the attempted murder, and it all goes from there.
You're talking about, Dan, the attempted murder I have to watch?
The
again?
woman with the blood.
The attempted murder in the art.
It's all there.
It's there.
Everything you needed was
It's
in
all
that
there.
scene. And I think about Case of the Scorpion's Tail when I think about cheats. And I don't know if you'd back me up on this, Troy, but there's one scene that you could, like a politician or an attorney would argue that it's not a cheat, but it's like a space-time continuum assumption cheat, right? Like it's kind of like, not unlike the Silence of the Lambs a bit, where it's a cheat, but it feels good, right? But there's a point where one suspect is in a place and then cut to he couldn't have been there because he was in a place, but there's a time shift that they don't tell you about.
Well, they do something similar in Tenebrae, of course, and
we don't talk about Tenebrae yet, Troy. Shh. They haven't.
haven't seen.
They haven't
seen Tenebrae.
We're almost there.
I sent them a Blu-ray of Tenebrae. We were going to go into that one virgin.
It also goes back to a Hitchcock film from the 50s called Stage Fright, which a lot of people were really bent out of shape because, without wanting to give too much away, there's a flashback that is a cheat. It's totally fair in context because of how it's being done and who's telling the story. It is perfectly fair, but a lot of people were not happy about that, and Hitchcock, sort of apologized for it. I don't think he should have, though. I think it actually works.
What was the cheat in Silence of the Lambs?
The doorbell thing.
The doorbell. Because it's not, they build this tension.
Purposely edited.
Yeah, it's an intentional, space or a space jump where you're in his basement. Now they're at the door. Now they're in the basement. Now they're at the door, and it builds a certain kind of tension, and it pays off well. But in a lesser movie, you would say, "Ugh, guys."
I didn't think that was a cheat at all. Explain to me how that's a cheat.
Because at some point
They
you will
cheat the
see a movie
viewer.
that tries the same thing but doesn't handle it well, and you're going to be like, "Oh my god, really? We're not even guys."
Okay. Well, anyways, that got me. So,
like in Sixth Sense, they show you. I keep bringing that up, but it's kind of in the same realm. Like the whole time, they show you constantly. It's in your face. It's there, and you're just watching a different movie than what he's showing you. So then when you finally know it, clearly she's arguing with a ghost at the table.
Whoa!
But he reaches for the bill right.
Just kidding.
Oh, well, I think everybody's seen that in the Titanic sinks too.
What?
But I mean, all those things. It's just sleight of hand.
That scene was the scene that I
figured it out.
I got it. Yeah,
Okay.
because when she's like ignoring him, you're supposed to think, oh, she's ignoring him
She's pissed
because
off.
she's so pissed off.
Right.
But I'm thinking, she's not talking to him. Like the kid who sees dead people is the only one that he's talked to this entire movie. I bet that
But that was
motherfucker's
George.
dead.
That was George watching that
I was
movie.
like, I bet that motherfucker's dead.
No, when I figured it out, when the ring rolled across the floor.
That's what
when
most
I figured,
people
and I'm
did,
like,
yeah.
God, oh, he got
Well,
me.
I didn't figure it out, but I thought it. I was
right.
I bet that motherfucker's
Right.
dead.
So I mean, they do that in these. From what I mean, these two films that I've seen, they do that a lot in these movies. It's just a lot of things going on purpose. Sleight of hand, figure this out.
See, I like
You
that
figure
kind of
this out.
stuff, though.
I'm fine with it. Yeah,
I like that kind of stuff where you should have seen it and you didn't. I like that.
unless you're watching Lace, which was just it was just a smorgasbord of just, hey, everybody's killing everybody, but there's only one person doing it. But
right. Well, the best example, and I won't say what it is because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the best hidden in plain view clue is definitely still Deep Red.
Oh, now
Okay.
actually,
Yes.
have you both watched Deep Red now?
I'm almost. I had to come off of that to do the homework for this episode,
Shaking
so I
my
will
head.
be watching that.
Deep Red is so good.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Best
That was
soundtrack.
my first Giallo.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was mine too. I came to the Giallo because I was into zombie movies, and my local Best Buy back in like 2002, 2003 had Zombie by Lucio Fulci, who I had no idea who that was, but it was so graphic and violent and full of boobs and violence that I looked up everything Fulci did, and I read about him online, and I thought, okay, this guy's great. Ooh, they keep mentioning this Argento guy. And then through Fulci, I got to Argento. And God, that was 20 years ago, guys.
I'm surprised I'm just coming to this now.
I'm not.
And I'm kicking and screaming. Like, I definitely had not as much trouble watching Lace as I had watching Bird. But after the second time I watched it, I knew my problem was what we talked about.
Yeah, whenever I watch a film that's, done in a different language, I like to watch it in the native language first. And I didn't even realize that a lot of that is dubbed anyway, but I think maybe it's dubbed better. I don't know.
Right.
But like I watch a Korean film, I watch it in Korean, I read the subtitles, I watch it again.
Well, part of that too could be, if you're watching it subtitled and you're not to a place where you can kind of tune the subtitles out and, pay attention to the mouths, you're not noticing that the lip movements don't match because you're reading it.
Yeah, so I like to watch the subtitles first, and then I watch the movie without the subtitles, and I just, I've already read the movie, so I know what's going on.
Right.
But on this one, when I was watching it, I started watching it in Italian and reading the subtitles, and my wife says, their lips are speaking English.
Yes, they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, well, let me switch over to English. And even that was, not really great.
Well, what was
but
the
I was
other
like,
one we
whatever.
watched?
I just kept going.
What have they done to your daughters?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had the same problem with watching that. It's there's something about foreign films with me that I will definitely get there, but it's shell shock for me.
Well, having a little insight, and thank you for that, Troy, about why it is that way, it's much more forgivable now.
No, I believe that.
I mean, it became almost a point of pride with some people. Fellini, for example, he loved the artificiality of dubbing. He thought that was just another part of the process. It was another layer that he could play with. Other directors like Bertolucci tried introducing more direct sound recording, because he felt that was something that was lacking. So it all depends on your perspective. But yeah, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why that was the case, and it was the norm for many, many years. And, more recently, the films very often are shot with a lot more in the way of direct sound. But depending on whether they feel the accents are too much for the American audience or whatever, they may still go back and revoice certain actors.
Now, one thing that might just knock Travis on his butt. Travis, imagine you're on set. You're across from me. You deliver your line in English, realizing that they're all just looking at your face, right? Now cut to me and I go, "A tutti mano giallo." And you're like, oh, shit, that guy spoke Italian. What do I do? But a lot of actors, right? Is this correct? Right? I've heard this, that a lot of actors just spoke their native tongue to get the emotional facial acting down so they're more comfortable. And then because they're dubbing it in the end, it doesn't matter.
It depended. A lot of them would speak English on set if they were comfortable speaking English. Actors who weren't comfortable speaking English might speak their own language. So, some of these movies are a real kind of melting pot of different nationalities. And I always remember hearing a story about one Sherlock Holmes film that was made in Germany back in the 60s. It starred Christopher Lee as Sherlock Holmes. And there were actors speaking English, there were actors speaking French, there were actors speaking German, there was at least one, I think, speaking Spanish. And one of the English actors on the film was totally just lost in this. Yeah. And he went to the director at one point and said, "Can you please tell so-and-so to stick his finger up his nose so I know when he's done? Because I don't know when to speak."
I could totally buy into that. Like, you have cues. You have dialogue cues. And if you don't know what the person's saying, and, some actors will say, I like when someone comes to the set to do the, what do you call that? When they're off camera?
Yeah.
Feeding the lines off camera, because you're getting that emotion from that actor, which allows you to get up your performance.
What?
What?
Go ahead. I was gonna say, what does the pimp say in this one? Whenever so it doesn't stutter?
So long.
Yeah, so just say so long after every line.
So long.
So long. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine if you don't know what the person's saying, that it does affect your performance.
Absolutely.
Because it's an exercise in acting. In listening, you have to listen to what the other person's saying. You don't want to sit there and think about, okay, when he says the thing, I have to say this. You're going to listen for the thing, but you also have to hear what they're saying, because you have to react appropriately.
Yeah.
If they change their delivery, same line, they change their delivery, that should change your performance. But if you don't know what they're saying...
Well, yeah. And that was a problem that Argento had when he came to America. He did a couple of films in America in the early 90s. And he found himself working with Harvey Keitel on a film at one point, and it was tough for him because Argento speaks functional English. He doesn't speak it fantastically fluently, but he knows enough to get by. But there's Harvey Keitel coming in, being Harvey Keitel, and he starts to improvise and ad-lib, and he's like, no, I don't know what you're doing. Yeah. So it was frustrating for him, too. In the same way, back in the 60s, when Clint Eastwood was doing a lot of films in Italy, he never learned to speak Italian, but he learned to understand it enough that whenever he was doing scenes with Italian actors, he would kind of get an idea, okay, I think it's my turn now.
Right.
Then they do it in post.
Now, one thing that I wonder with you, Travis, and I think you're going to need to get over your reticence to read subtitles. And here's why.
Okay.
I think the reason that George prefers the native tongue when he's watching these movies isn't necessarily whether the lips are matched up or not. I think it's a lack of sensitivity to the nuance of a language you don't speak, right? If you hear someone in English giving an over-the-top performance, you're going to be like, oh, God, nobody talks like that. Ugh. Right?
Right.
But, or a wooden performance, like you said, Troy, the Blood and Black Lace has a lot of acting like this, and it hurts to listen to a little bit. But if you don't speak Italian or Korean or German, your brain doesn't filter out the stuff that doesn't sound natural, and instead you can just focus on what the movie is doing, not what it's not doing.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
But I don't think my issue is that. Like, if I watch a movie that was clearly an Italian movie and the voices are dubbed, the delivery of those lines don't bother me as much as sometimes the visual acting.
If you spoke Italian, it'd be worse.
Maybe, but I don't... The reading... it just takes... My problem with the reading isn't because I don't want to read. It's just I'm a visual person. I like to watch the performance.
Right, Trav.
I like to watch the background. I like to watch what's going on in this room, what's sitting on the table, why is it there?
That's why I like to watch subtitles first.
Right.
Get the story, and then just watch the movie in another language.
I'm fine with that.
I think we're getting into another thing that's important to understand about these films, but that is tough for a lot of American people in particular when they start watching these movies, is that they are very visual films, and they're very concerned with things like mood and atmosphere and really interesting camera work. And there's kind of a mentality in America that movies need to be read as if they're literature, that the only movies that are any good are movies that have really good plots and really deep characterization, and that's what film is supposed to be all about. I'd say film is a much more visual medium, and there is no real rule as to what a film should or should not be. How we react to a film is very subjective, and you may not like a film that's a little light on the plot, let's say. But by the same token, if a film isn't really going for a particular deep, meaningful, socio-political, really kind of layered critique kind of an approach, or very literate approach, and it's just going for something that's very visual, that's not a flaw. That's what it is going for, and it should be assessed on that level. But again, that may not be something that you're particularly in tune to, because I think, culturally, we're really sort of trained to think that there's only one way to tell a story, and that's the American way. We saw this when Bird with Crystal Plumage was released in 1970 in America, where it did very well, surprisingly, and it got some very good reviews, but there were some very snobby reviews that came out and basically said, oh, this movie is, it cheats, and it's not, it's not logical, and it's not following the kind of Hollywood approach. Well, there are other ways of telling stories and making films that aren't the Hollywood approach. So I think sometimes that comes down to what you're accustomed to, and that's understandable. If you're used to 20, 30 years of watching films that follow a certain approach and a certain way of telling things and doing things, and then all of a sudden you see something else that just totally throws that out the window and says, no, we're going to do it differently, that can take getting used to.
Mm-hmm. And I think like you watch a movie, and this is why I think I know I don't have a problem with subtitles. It's just like Schindler's List. When you watch Schindler's List, you don't have to read what they're saying. You could totally block out those subtitles. You know what's going on there. You know what they're feeling. Like The Passion. I could watch The Passion.
I haven't ever seen
Okay,
Schindler's
I know.
List.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
But like even The Passion, when you watch a movie, it's all in Aramaic. You know the story. So you don't really have to read. You know what they're doing visually.
Right.
So with these movies, once I know them well enough, it won't bother me. Lips don't bother me. My wife, it flips her out.
It
doesn't bother me at all if they don't match up. I've seen...
And she may never, and that's fine. Right. I'm sure she can live her entire life quite happily without being a Dario Argento fan. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, it is something that takes getting used to. I sometimes forget that. When I flash back and think about when I first started watching these movies when I was very young. It took me a while, not even just the music, the dubbing, but also the music is very different.
Yes.
And the music takes getting used to as well. Mm-hmm. Of course, this movie has an extraordinary score by Ennio Morricone, which, anybody who knows anything about film should know who Ennio Morricone is, one of the great composers, but it's a different kind of approach to scoring a movie versus a American thriller. It has that kind of creepy, sing-songy lullaby type of soundtrack that is, again, that's either going to work for you or it doesn't. It works for me, but maybe some people might find that, well, again, it might seem a little bit hokey at this point because other movies copied that. And right. So, you're used to that now. That wasn't the case in 1970.
Now, George, did you hear me pop up on your shoulder when the score to this movie started with the first la 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 la? Did you have me in your ear going, I told you Dirty Harry ripped off Italian movies? Mm-hmm. Just last week I said, I tried to make it like, I didn't want to give it away that you were about to hear it. So I was like, oh yes, there's a couple of Jolly that have very similar la 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 scores. I'm sure you'll hear them at some point.
In more ways than one.
Now, I didn't think of Dirty Harry, but you know what I thought of? And I don't know if all of you guys have seen this. There's like a Netflix, or not Netflix. It's a Amazon original, Man in a High Castle. Mm-mm. You don't know it? Dan, do you know it?
I'm aware of
Troy?
What it is. I only watched
Anybody?
one episode, though, so I didn't.
Okay, so the intro, and that is a very dark show, right? For those of you that don't know, it's like it takes place in an America where if Germany would have won World War II. And it's split between Japan and Germany and blah blah. It's a very dark show, but it starts off the theme song is Edelweiss, and it's sung by like a little girl, and it's just creepy. Yeah. Like it's like kind of sing-songy but creepy.
Amityville Horror does the same thing. It's like la,
yep.
La,
That's what it reminded me of right off the bat.
Lalo Schifrin scored Amityville and Dirty Harry.
Right. And what's funny with the Dirty Harry, my issues I had with these movies, I had with Dirty Harry, and it it makes sense now because Dirty Harry has that same kind of acting where it's like, I'm going to throw my shoulder, I'm going to throw everything into this line, and it's almost like purposely done, almost soap opera-ish, but the acting's nowhere near as bad as the soap opera, but it has that same thing. When you watch Telemundo, they do the same thing. You know, they just overreact purposely. It's almost like an acting choice. It's a choice.
Right.
Well, these are very stylized films,
right,
and I think
right,
the
stylized.
acting
It's a good word.
is consistent with that. You were mentioning Hammer before, and I put up a significant objection to that because I love those films.
Yeah,
but
no, I wasn't criticizing. I was just saying.
I understand there is a theatricality that can come through because these were theater actors.
Right.
Peter Cushing was a theater actor. Christopher Lee was not. But where you see it the worst is when you had the occasional actor in those films who thought it was beneath them. There were instances of actors who came into those films, not Christopher Lee, not Peter Cushing, but some of the other actors who occasionally did them who thought, oh, this is just a piece of shit. I'm going to play it down. I'm not going to take it seriously. And it's very obvious when it happens because you find somebody who's giving this kind of shouty, annoying, inappropriate performance. Whereas the best films, I think, the acting is perfectly in sync with the material and holds up very well. I'd say even rather realistic. But again, things like this change. I've been watching a lot of silent movies lately, and that's something you got to get used to too. If you're watching films that are 100 years old at this point, talking about big acting, but of course they didn't have the benefit of dialogue. They didn't have the benefit of people hearing their voices, so they had to really kind of put everything into it. And some people just, but it's the same thing. It's always driven me nuts when I talk to people who say, "Oh, I don't like black and white movies, and I don't like old movies because the acting was always so bad." No, bullshit. You have to learn to adjust to them. If you want to, it's not something that you have to do. You can't go through life without being able to appreciate Citizen Kane. All right, so you have to be able to put it into context if you want to understand them. But
I try to go by time frame. Like if it's a 60s movie, I know what the performance is going to be like. If it's a 50s, 40s, by the decade how it's going to be.
I've said that before.
Yeah. And then sometimes they throw you a curveball. Like I think of Halloween now after watching these. I think of Halloween and the performances in that, and it's a lot of that stuff is purposely done because that's the era, and that's what I see the reference now. So they are.
Yeah, exactly. And Halloween's a great example too of the movie that looks very cliched now. I remember watching that film with a girlfriend one time, and she said, "Oh, they always fall down in these movies." I said,
"Right.
This was the movie that got that started. This is where the cliches were born. Not to say there weren't examples before, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, for example, but this is where a lot of this stuff was born from. And don't think that John Carpenter, who made that film and did a remarkable job making that film for the money that he had, wasn't aware of the fact that there were things in it that weren't realistic. But he was very influenced by people like Dario Argento. Dario Argento is not only a good friend of his, he's also a director he admires. He was referencing movies like Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Deep Red, and was trying to do something rather similar, but with a very stripped down kind of a plot.
Yeah.
God,
and thanks to Dan, we know this now.
I ruined Travis's life when we went through the first 20 minutes of 7 Bloodstained Orchids. Travis was just like, no, not looking, can't see it.
Yeah, I was like Luke Skywalker. I'm like, this is impossible. Yeah, I know.
It's the same shirt.
I'm on board now.
Oh,
although Dan, my thing still holds true though. Like when I'm watching these movies, I realize the references, but my love of Halloween and whatever, and all those slasher films in America, I said it before, is the branding. I really love the branded killer. I love the visual branded killer, where it's not like this generic.
We know how to brand shit. Person
in a trench coat. Now you're looking at evil. You're seeing that face, that white face. And I kidded with Dan. I'm like, if they did it in Italy, if they did Halloween in Italy, it would just be a plastic mime face instead.
Well, yeah.
But there's just something eerie about that Kirk mask. and what they
well,
did
that
with
was that was a very deliberate thing because I'm sure you've heard the story about how when they made the film, that Carpenter sent Tommy Lee Wallace out to get masks, and one of the masks he got was a clown mask, and thank God they didn't pick that. He picked the right mask, and of course, I'm sure William Shatner was incensed when he became aware of all the money that was being made off of his face without being aware of it. Although they changed it, in fairness, so fair enough. But yeah, it is an iconic thing, and of course, there he was creating basically the boogeyman. And that's something that bugged a lot of people about that movie too, is the fact that, well, wait a minute, why is he doing this, and how does he survive this, and how is this possible? He likes, in Carpenter's case, he very often likes to leave people with more questions than answers. A lot of his movies end in a way that is very unsatisfying for some people, but I love it because you don't get the answer. Everything isn't tidied up. I like not knowing whether McCready or Childs are infected at the end of the thing. I'm aware that those two guys are not going to live. This is a bleak ending. Right. And of course the movie flopped terribly when it came out, although it's a masterpiece. But I like endings like that don't clarify everything. Bird with the Crystal Plumage is funny because it's obviously it was Argento's first movie as a director. I think the little psycho type scene at the end with the psychiatrist coming in, which Argento basically plays for laughs by having the inspector falling asleep in his chair while he's talking and everything, just sort of pontificating about the psychology and everything. He doesn't really care about that. That's just concession to the audience, and he didn't really do that in his later movies.
See, I looked at that as like a character choice for the inspector because he clearly was out of his element. His element is on the street. Yep. Tracking a killer, and here he is on TV. That's why he passes it off. He's like, well, how about you talk to him because I don't want to talk about it. I don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
that was good.
To me, I didn't look at it as a throw-in at all.
It's like me talking about Giallo movies.
Right. Soon you'll be able to.
Yeah, I don't know about soon. Troy, I wanted to thank you. You articulated something that I feel like I'm experiencing now through this podcast. You said, I even forget how you said it, but you said that, American audiences want the story to be told like in an American way. And when I started this podcast with these two guys, my favorite movies, my favorite movies were tragedies. And I told them, straight up, I think episode 1, like that's where my head's at. I like Road to Perdition. I like King Kong.
Oh, yes.
I like, I like these movies that resemble life because, like,
think
life
of the
is a
tragedies
tragedy.
you haven't seen yet.
Right. But the more I watch these movies with Dan and Travis, and I think this happened during Dirty Harry, I realized this movie is not realistic at all, but I'm enjoying it. I'm getting into it. And that's something that I never could do before. I felt like watching a movie that wasn't realistic was kind of like a waste of time.
Right.
But it's not. Like, it's art, so it can be anything.
Sure.
Right?
It's
Absolutely.
funny, Troy. If you ever get around to listening to any of our podcasts, the RoboCop, George's first comment, sums all that up. He basically, after one of Dan's favorite movies, I love it for nostalgic reasons. And George's first question was, "Did you guys just make me watch the worst movie ever made on purpose, or?"
It's funny. It's funny you should say that because my all-time favorite horror film is Rosemary's Baby, and I think it is as close to perfection as any movie I've ever seen. I don't think any movie's perfect, but I think that movie is as close. What Polanski did in that film is just amazing. And
George will be seeing that eventually.
And that's a movie, I don't want to say too much about it. You haven't seen it, but I mean, you don't see anything. It's all it's implied stuff and everything else. I remember showing it to another girl that I was with at the time. I have a knack of picking girls with bad cinema taste, and I had played this movie up to her. I said, "Oh, this is we'll watch this because this is such a great movie." And I'm sitting there watching it with her, and I'm just totally immersed. And it gets into the dream sequence, which to me is one of the greatest scenes ever made. And it's so creepy and it's so wonderful. And she looks at me and says, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life." And I was heartbroken. And I said, "Well, we can stop watching if you." No, we might as well finish it up. But it was funny because by the time you got into the last 45 minutes or so, it clicked. And she was like, and she was into it the whole way. She loved the end. She said, oh, if only they would have cut out all that bullshit at the beginning. I said, no, you need all that build up. You need all the, it starts off like a soap opera, and it's everything is all sunny, and you need that before you get the you need the creepy stuff to come in gradually. But it was funny because, it went from this is the worst movie I've ever seen to, okay, that was good. Maybe I didn't like the first half as much as you did. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny too because people, it's very often what they're exposed to and when they're exposed to it. I was exposed to old movies, quote unquote old movies, when I was very young. And so it was never an issue for me to watch movies that were in black and white. I have never had an issue watching old films and thinking, oh, this acting is so hokey. It doesn't bother me. I can watch a film like Frankenstein from 1931, and yes, there are performances in that film that look awfully over the top today. Doesn't matter. To me, it works perfectly, and I do believe that it has a lot to do with this when you're exposed to it. In particular, I was lucky that I was a child when I started seeing these movies. So to me, it was always normal.
Well, one of my first crushes was Fay Wray, and one of my favorite movies is King Kong. So I remember learning very early that overacting isn't always a bad thing.
No.
The funny thing about with what you were saying about the girlfriend, my oldest son, I started letting him watch some of these movies that we're doing, and he watched Halloween with me. Now, I've seen Halloween about 280 times. Like, it's one of my favorite movies ever made. And he's 15, and when it was over, he basically said, that was boring. He told me it was boring.
Well, I mean, if you're used to slasher movies that came afterwards where people were getting axes in the face and everything else, or, but the pacing is very different in films then, too.
Right. I think he's just used to TikTok.
It was his first horror, like his first slasher film ever. And to me, my reaction to him was, well, you guys want everything in 2 seconds, 3 seconds, like all these little, that's the generation. And I said, there's a thing called suspense, and you guys don't know it. Because he was bored with Alien, too. When we watched Alien, he was bored with that. He just wanted to get to the alien. And
right. Like, it's slow. It takes a long time to get to the the money shot when John Hurt gets the alien comes through his chest.
Right.
And that's something, you either get used to it when you're young, or you kind of gradually get used to it when you're older if you're open to it. And some people are open to it and will. And some people, no, I don't like the way movies used to be because they were slow and they were boring and they were too talky and the acting was bad and, blah, 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 blah. Well,
and then you stop dating them.
Well, it can be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife is George's sister, so she has the same problem that he has where she's never seen anything. So I'm always showing her things for the first time, and it's like she either enjoys it for what it is, or I got to explain to her why she likes it. I'm like, you'll like it after 3 times of seeing it, or this is why it's awesome, and this is why you don't get it.
Can I tell you guys that the Silence of the Lambs almost ended my marriage the other night?
Really?
Go seriously? On. Well, not almost. I mean, we were going to get through it either way, but I wanted to show this movie to my wife because my wife has never seen it, right? And I think it's a masterpiece. I had just seen it for the first time a couple of weeks ago. So I want to show it to her, and she sits down on the couch with her phone and her notebook, and she's doing not to take notes about the movie, right. She's
to work or
she's
whatever.
Doing her schedule for the week and putting together a grocery list, and I was like, no, we're not going to watch this movie like that. And she was like, what? And she was arguing with me I'm an adult. I can do whatever I want. I can watch a movie however I want. And I was like, no, you're going to give this movie your full attention or you're not going to watch it.
Right.
Watch it or don't. She got mad at me.
Do you see what we created, Dan?
We did it.
We showed him one of the greatest movies ever made, and now it's ending his marriage now.
Well, it's tough. It's tough when people, and that is not to sound like too much of an old fart, but it's true. It's a very different experience now for a variety of different reasons. A lot of it is to do with the phone. We have the phone at our hand all the time, and it's easy to be distracted. And if it's one thing if you're revisiting a movie you've seen 25 times and you're sort of checking in and out, that's fine. If you're watching it for the first time, it's kind of a good idea. If you really want to give it its due, you want to pay attention to it. But there are so many different reasons for that, and unfortunately very often a lot of people they don't really have the opportunity of really immersing themselves in a movie for that reason.
Yes, and I was a victim of that, or a perpetrator of that. I've actually seen a decent amount of movies, but I haven't actually watched them.
Right.
They were always on in the background while I was doing something else. I never really was a movie watcher.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I want to just mention, like, in her defense, she was actually kind of like stressed out about watching this movie. She's not used to. She doesn't like gore. She's not used to this, like, the stress of a thriller, and so she felt like she might need to distract herself during this movie.
No, we love her, so we get it. We get
so
it.
she wasn't really disrespecting it as much as I thought.
There's another component to this too, and it's something that I've often said about Citizen Kane, and I don't know if everybody's seen that or not.
I can guarantee you George has not seen Citizen Kane.
Well, how can anybody sit down to watch a movie being told this is the greatest movie ever made and not be disappointed?
Right.
It's impossible. So that's where sometimes when you tell people ahead of time, oh, this is you got to watch, this is the great. Don't do that to them because you're setting them up for disappointment. You might be better off just saying, you know what, it's pretty good. I'd be curious, watch it and tell me what you think. Yeah, that kind of approach, as opposed to saying you are about to watch the greatest movie ever made.
Yeah. A lot of pressure on that.
One thing we love about, at least I love about doing this podcast, because George has to watch what we tell him, so we don't have to sell it to him.
Yeah, you don't have to sell it to me. That's right.
I mean, a few weeks ago he watched First Blood. And he didn't know it was a Rambo movie. We didn't tell him.
No.
Well, he found out.
Yes, he did.
Pretty quickly, yeah.
It's on him, it's on us.
Actually, one movie that did actually deliver, one of my friends told me, like, the best movie ever made of all time is American History X. And I was like, okay, I got to watch that movie, right? That actually delivered. I was like, hot damn, that was a very good movie.
Yeah, but I like keeping a secret, like with American Werewolf in London. You did not expect that at all.
No.
It was, he has seen Shaun of the Dead, so he is aware of the comedy horror, the drum horror funny. And he was expecting just a werewolf movie, and we had watched Psycho a couple of weeks ago. He thought it was a black and white.
Yeah.
And he was blown away by the fact that it was funny, it was edgy, it was new.
Yep.
And here's a movie from 1981-ish, and it's new. And I love, that's why I love doing this.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
There's movies that even I haven't seen in 25 years. And then I get to watch it in this context, and it makes me watch it. Like you said with me. Yeah. Like, you have to watch it. And sometimes it's just background noise to me, but when I actually watch the movie, I catch things I didn't see.
Yep.
Or I watch it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I've gone into films knowing they had great reputations. In some cases, they deliver. I mean, The Godfather, to me, is a movie I can watch over and over again, and I'm totally immersed in that. But I could also see that being a movie that would bore the hell out of you if you're not really invested in it, because it's a long film. There's a lot of talking. There's not a lot of action. Not last year, the year before, Scorsese did a film called The Irishman, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Loved it. And I talked to some people who were like, oh, it was so boring. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But, a lot of the stuff that people hated in that film, I loved. The whole last act of the film dealing with De Niro in his old age and so forth, I thought that made the movie. That, to me, was amazing material, was vitally important. Some people were like, oh, that's so boring. So you never know. I mean, you can go into a movie. I watched Gone with the Wind, and I thought, I don't, it's not for me. I understand why it's important. I appreciate how well made it is, but I didn't care about it. I wasn't interested at all. But yeah, The Godfather, I can certainly, again and again and again. Most Scorsese films, for me, are just absolutely amazing. I love them. But you never know until you try, and that's the key thing, I guess. Give it its due, give it a fair trial, I guess, so to speak. And then, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, I think the key is just to be able to articulate why you don't like it or why you do like it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that someone would even say Godfather's boring because there's no action. Like, if there was no dialogue in that movie and they were just looking at each other, I'd be like, yeah.
Oh, I love it. I mean, there's just...
Absolutely. Look at that look he just did. Look at that look.
And that's Al Pacino before
Yep.
he became. I mean, I love Al Pacino. Don't get me wrong. And I mentioned the Irishman. I thought he was brilliant in that. Best performance he gave in many years. But he turned into a caricature after a certain point. I mean, as much as I love him, we're accustomed to him just shouting for no reason. But he doesn't do that in The Godfather or Godfather. I mean, none of his 70s movies, he really doesn't do that.
It's the subtle Pacino. I enjoy the subtle
very
Pacino.
subtle. I do too. Which The Irishman was a great movie in the sense that gave him moments of subtlety and also moments of the explosiveness we expect.
Right.
So that works. Yeah, to me, that's, there's nothing boring in that. But yeah, I mean, depending on your attitude, especially if you think movies need to be really fast and the cutting needs to be really fast, that's going to be a tough sell.
I do that stuff with, when we watched Young Frankenstein, I was like, okay,
yeah,
watch Gene Wilder.
Mm-hmm.
Watch him go from 1 to 11 in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And then right back to 1 again.
Yep.
And you love every bit of it. Every single thing he just said, whether he's at 1 or 11, was perfect. And he does that even when, like, Blazing Saddles, like, his delivery of lines.
He's brilliant.
It's like ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you don't get that anymore.
He was great.
You don't get that anymore.
No. I mean, I enjoy Will Ferrell. I enjoy him. I actually do find him rather funny, especially when he's working with John C. Reilly, John C. Reilly's one of those guys who goes back and forth. I mean, he's worked with Polanski and Scorsese, and then he shows up in really goofy, comedies. Yep. So God bless him. I love him for that. But there's nobody who's quite on that tier of Gene Wilder and what he did. He was amazing.
Well, and so were you, Troy. Thank you for coming on today, giving us insight into Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but also just helping me to convince George and Travis that the Italian genre cinema is a worthy pursuit. And hopefully we made George love the movie a little bit more than he thought he did at the beginning of this thing. So before you head out of here, why don't you tell us about what you got going on, what you got out, and for our listeners to check out?
Well, it's always awkward for me to talk about myself. Well, as far as books go, most of my books really are focused on not just Italian, but also Spanish genre cinema. So my first book was The Haunted World of Mario Bava, which is obviously about Mario Bava and his films. I've also written books on John Carpenter. There's Assault on the System, the nonconformist cinema of John Carpenter. Dario Argento, I did a book called Murder by Design, the unsane cinema of Dario Argento. Lucio Fulci, I did Splintered Visions, Lucio Fulci and his films, and a trilogy of books about the Giallo, appropriate for what we were talking about on this show. They're called So Deadly, So Perverse, and the first 2 volumes cover all the Giallo films made in Italy between 1963 and 2013. When I say all the films, I'm well aware that there are people who say, he left this movie out and he left that movie out. Write your own goddamn book. I put in all the films that I think qualified, and I had some good Italian cinema scholar friends who backed me up on that. So I think it is pretty comprehensive. But the 3rd volume is devoted to movies in the Giallo style made outside of Italy. And that includes Halloween and Friday the 13th, amongst many, many other films from India and Asia and various other places, Greece, Turkey. So it's a pretty comprehensive world tour, but not meant to have every single movie in that style, from around the world. That would be impossible. So that's in it. Audio commentary wise. Yes, I did Bird with the Crystal Plumage for Arrow Films. I've also done a number of other Argento tracks, including Phantom of the Opera, Sleepless, Suspiria, Opera, and Phenomena, and The Card Player. And I'm going to be recording at least one more this year on one of his films. Can't say which one yet.
Yay.
And there's also numerous Lucio Fulci tracks and Paul Naschy tracks. But even things like, I Walk Alone, which is a Burt Lancaster film noir movie from the 40s. So a little bit of everything. Over 100 tracks out there. If you want to check any of them out, certainly, hopefully you won't find them boring.
Now, Troy, we can't thank you enough for being on the show. I've been a fan of yours for years, but I think I've made at least one more fan tonight. I'm still working on George. He's a hard sell.
No.
But You've written a lot of freaking books about these movies. I don't know if you consider yourself an expert, but you're definitely a resource for our listeners. For American film watchers who know their Halloweens and their Jasons, but they want to dip their toe in and they're tired of me talking about Argento all the time, are there 2 or 3 Italian Giallos or Spanish Giallos that you would suggest to maybe try to find on streaming for a new watcher who just wants to know what the hell we're doing making them talk about these movies?
Well, when it comes to Gialli, I would say Blood and Black Lace is certainly, again, it is a template. It's a very important film. A very brutal movie for its time. I still think a movie that holds up in terms of its brutality. It's very vicious, very physical in its murder sequences, but beautifully shot. So it's a very creepy and uncomfortable kind of a feeling that you get watching that film. Some people will say, "Oh, it just looks like red lipstick." It really wasn't meant to look like blood and gore. It's a more stylized kind of a thing. So that's not a flaw. That's just a stylistic thing. Blood and Black Lace, certainly. Lucio Fulci did a film called Don't Torture a Duckling that I can't recommend highly enough. I just think that's an amazing movie, really, really powerful movie that's got a couple of scenes in it that are just, classic Fulci. Deep Red by Argento is Argento's masterpiece. I think one of the, it is my favorite Giallo, and certainly a movie I'd highly recommend. Non Argento, Bava, Fulci, I'd recommend movies like What Have They Done to Solange by Massimo Dallamano, or Black Belly of the Tarantula by Paolo Cavara, or The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward by Sergio Martino. That's one of the things about these movies, too. They always have very convoluted and eye-catching titles, and I love them.
You mean you don't think Your Vice is a locked room and only I have the key fits on an American marquee?
That would get me into a theater, though. I'll tell you what, I want to see that movie.
Oh my gosh,
that's a graphic designer's nightmare.
When you were
a title like that.
When you were talking, Troy, about the camera work, I kept thinking about Sister of Ursula, and how the first time I watched it, I thought, my God, these locations, this camera work. Oh.
Yeah, that's not a highlight.
It's got some stuff. I mean,
yeah, it does.
It's got some great locations.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's got some stuff.
It's got some stuff. It's no Giallo of Venezia, but what is?
That did a commentary for that one too.
Oh yes, you did. That's one of your good. I like that one a lot, actually. That's on the other podcast we're gonna do with George, The Corruption of George. That's coming later.
Good luck.
Yeah. No. Well, Troy.
Meg will not be sitting down with that one.
What have they done to George Warner?
It's going to be so good.
Solange was one of my favorites, too.
Oh, yeah. I forgot I made you watch Solange.
I like Solange a lot.
You're going to love Don't Torture a Duckling, too. It's going to hit some notes for you that you don't expect, I think. But I think it'll work. Travis, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not.
There is a particular scene in that film that nobody ever forgets, and it lingers with you. And it's a very intelligent movie too. It's actually very Fulci, apart from all the blood and gore, was really very interested in a lot of sort of socio-political commentary. So there's some stuff in that movie to chew on. There's some interesting kinds of social commentary that I think it's a very layered movie.
Very good.
Well, Troy, thank you so much, man. If we can ever do anything for you, let us know. We're always around.
I will call in a favor if need be.
All right, Troy. Well,
thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Troy, anytime
Thanks, Troy.
You want to talk about movies.
Oh, yeah. If you ever want me on again, just let me know.
I mean, masculine reaction of happiness.
Okay.
Wow. Way to send Troy off.
Hey,
good.
I do what I can. I'm here to entertain. Thank you so much, Troy.
All right, thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you both.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, go thank yourself, George.
Yeah. I'm going to make a t-shirt that just says, yee! And then a dash, Dan. Yay! That was good.
All right. Thanks again to Troy Howarth for joining us for The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. But I don't think that we got all the way to the core of why George needs to like this movie. Going back to The Bird with the one with the crystal plumage. Not the other one, you know.
The bird, the plumage was really underwhelming, to be quite honest.
I think it's intended to be a bit of a red herring from the beginning. You know, it
didn't look like a herring. It was like more like a peacock. I'm just kidding.
Exasperation.
Well, I think
Get your mic closer.
Oh, I did not like it when I first saw it either. So I'm glad we did this because listening to him talk about it doesn't make me like it anymore, but at least it makes me understand why I should like it.
Well, it's that thing where if you saw Deep Red first and you hadn't seen any other slasher movies in a long time, you hadn't seen Giallo, and you were just, hey, I like Deep Red, what do I watch next? This is really the answer because it takes you back a bit. You can see, if you compare it to Deep Red, you can see where in his formula he's improved. You know, where is Deep Red a tighter product than Bird? But you can also see that a lot of those ideas were already manifest in his first movie, and some of them have a harder edge than they end up having in Deep Red. Some of the violence in this is a bit more personal, a bit more brutal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as gory as Deep Red, but it's got just like a certain malice to it that I think Deep Red goes for but never really achieves at the same level. Did you catch like the Joker feeling? Joker from Dark Knight with the knives at the beginning in that tray.
Yeah.
That like full frame visual of knives on a drawer just very much reminds me of that shot in jail in The Dark Knight where they're scrolling across his knives like yeesh.
And the end.
I totally forgot about that.
You got kind of a Joker feel at the end as well. Uncontrollable laughter.
Yep.
I think what we'll probably do here, guys, and guys being you two, but also like listeners, I think we'll get to a certain point in this podcast, and I'm going to warn you from there on, if you don't want to spoil it, then just skip to the next episode, because we got to talk about the ending, but we have to do so in a way that protects you, the listener, from spoiling it, because this is a pretty good movie with a pretty substantial proto-Shyamalanian twisty twist. So we will not go there yet, but we will at some point. So one thing I did want to talk about, one of the things that makes this movie important, not so much its experience, although I think it's a hell of a flick. It's probably my second or third favorite Argento. But the substance of this movie goes on to inspire every Giallo that follows it, pretty much. That's why we've talked about it in the Friday episodes and the Halloween episodes. Mm-hmm. There are pre-Bird Giallo and there are post-Bird Giallo. And when I say post-Bird, I mean after 1970. Most of your Giallos have a citizen detective who's just kind of trying to solve the crime before the police for very, whatever, MacGuffin reason, right? I was watching I Know What You Did Last Summer today, which I had never seen. Meh.
Oh.
That's my... meh. It's all right. Meh.
Well, they were trying to cash in on something.
Right. But it's a fine film, but the whole time I'm looking at this thing like, oh, of course you can't call the police because of plot reasons. Like, yeah, that's the same trick we've been using for 30 years at that point. So it's fun to see that it stuck around, and it's been in other things. I mean, obviously Psycho, she couldn't have called the police for help. So anyway, in the Bird thing, the citizen policeman becomes a thing. But yeah, that scene with the the lady that gets killed after she walks through the park, you're going to see, if you keep watching these movies, a pretty lady alone in a park at dusk. I mean, that's on your bingo card. Just, Martino does it. Everybody does. You got to have a lady in tall hedges nearing dark on her way home alone. It's just, put it on your list. Just like you've got to have your citizen detective. You've got to have the incompetent police force for the most part, or the detached police force. Mm-hmm. Because police are boring. And he's right. If you ever want your homework, okay, George, Travis, homework for you. You're going to think this sounds like an interesting movie. It's called I Ragazzi del Massacro. All right, did you get that?
Mm-hmm.
American title, Naked Violence.
Nice.
It is essentially Law and Order with a couple of boobs in it. And it is so boring. Like, I really enjoyed the movie. It has a lot of actors I like in it. It's got a great director, sort of. I mean, a very well-known director, Fernando de Leo, who did a lot of crime movies. But it's a Law and Order episode, down even to the dun-dun between scenes. It's got its own little, like... that it does between scenes. It's bizarre. And it goes places that you would never expect. It's very strange. But the first hour or so is just like paint drying on a white wall. Like, it is just a snooze fest because it is a police procedural to the bone. It's visually stimulating, and the last act gets copied in a movie that we're about to watch here in the next probably season or so. Ripped off wholesale. So I'm excited to show it to you for real after we've watched the good movie that I can't tell you what it is.
Very good.
Oddly enough, that same good movie that I can't tell you what it is steals the scene from Bird with the Crystal Plumage, like wholesale too. Yeah, very fun.
Cool.
Can't wait to show you. This is one you might have actually heard of, but I know, Travis, you've seen it, so I can't tell you because it would spoil it. Much like my, hey, you're going to see an Italian movie someday that has this la 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 score from Dirty Harry. Oh, wait, it's the next episode.
What are you, Ernest P. Worrell?
I crack myself up. Actually, my kid was watching Ernest Scared Stupid earlier, so I might be. Let me ask Vern. Vern?
It rubs off on you.
Oh, man.
Air brakes.
You know, it's funny. I don't know if you caught it, Dan, but like today, before we started recording, when Travis came in, he actually took the parakeet and put it in the bedroom like we normally do. And he was like, I was putting the bird away.
Oh, that's good.
Like, and it's just funny. We were watching the bird. He was taking care of the bird.
I was taking care of the bird, putting it away.
How crystal was its plumage, though? Scale of 1 to 10.
Like a peacock.
Oh.
This, actually, my parakeet probably has closer plumage to crystal than that gray bird in this movie. But it's fine.
No, you know, one of my favorite things about these kind of lower budget Italian movies, they play fast and loose with the plot, and they play fast and loose with kind of time and space, and sometimes, like Troy said, they make emotional sense. They don't make logical sense. There's one Argento in particular I'm thinking of that I've shown it to some people, and it's their favorite movie from the first moment. And other people are asleep halfway through and mad at me for showing it to them because it is so narratively detached from what you expect as an American viewer.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my favorite things that these genre films from the 70s do is they play really fast and loose with animal species to where you might have a bird with a crystal plumage and you get gray, right? You might have a movie called The Parrot and it might be a parakeet, right? There's not a lot of attention to scientific or real detail because budget defines what you can get. I bring this up because
there's a chimpanzee obsessed with blades.
Right. God, I wanted to tell Troy that you guys had seen Phenomena, but I don't think he would have believed me. Why did you show that to him first? A lot of reasons, but at the same time, why did I show you that first? Sometimes you just got to establish expectations, right? I like Phenomena, but
there was a good reason.
Right. I thought of that, and I thought of Friday 13th Part 6 almost immediately on the opening of Blood and Black Lace with the swinging sign.
Yes, and the storm. Yep.
I was like, oh, this is so Part 6.
So the best animal example that I'm going to tell you guys about, there's that movie that Troy mentioned called Black Belly of the Tarantula. And there's all this talk of like the tarantula hawk wasp, right? Which if you've ever seen a tarantula hawk wasp, that's a bad motherfucker. Like that thing don't play.
Mm-hmm.
That's a BMF.
But for whatever reason, for budgetary reasons, they couldn't get actual footage of a tarantula hawk. And so instead, they have insert footage of a honeybee attacking a small spider. And it's
That's
hysterical to be like, oh, that's obviously a honeybee. Like, that is not a tarantula hawk wasp. That's a buzzy bee.
Why didn't they just get a wasp?
Any
That's
wasp,
terrible.
just a paper wasp, right? Just
Any wasp.
any wasp. But it's a
Just a white
honeybee.
Anglo-Saxon Protestant would do.
Even a woman
To be
dressed
fair,
as a bee.
to be fair, in about 20 years, people are gonna be like, "Oh, remember bees?"
Yeah, right. And then you say, well,
Remember
thank your...
bees?
Oh man. But yeah, don't watch Sister Ursula till we've seen all the other Giallos. That one's not good, but it is really trashy and fun. So let's take
Bird.
let's take stock a little bit. You've heard now from Troy. You've heard me singing its praises for months. I don't know if I would have raised your expectations by bringing it up because I never said it was great, but it is very much important. Do you now, having heard all of our kind of praise for this movie and where it fits,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to watch it again? Is it a movie that you're interested in?
I already have. I watched it twice.
I know, but would you watch it a third time? Travis, do you want to watch it again? Are you like, man, maybe if I go back...
Are you talking about Plumage?
Plumage.
Probably not for me. But
I
go ahead.
might watch it one more time, based on what we talked about. But I don't expect different results.
I might watch it one more time just because you said that there was things that I had missed in the first part. So I might watch it one more time.
If you watch the first scene, at least the scene in the art gallery, the earliest action scene, if you watch it now with the knowledge that you have from the second and third acts of the movie, you can at least fact check it to see that indeed they do not cheat, and a keen-eyed observer could have potentially picked what was to come.
I did realize the kill, the second go around, the kill of the, I guess it would be the second kill, the see-through top going to bed chick.
Yeah.
When she puts her cigarette down and then she looks up at the door and the killer's there, around the killer's head is you can kind of see.
So we're entering spoiler territory then. Are you guys ready to do this? Should I give our disclaimer? Hey, everybody.
Well, I think we are. I think I already spoiled it. So
I'm
you're
gonna
gonna have
bleep
to,
that.
Dan, in post spoil it. Yeah. So I did kind of notice that.
Hey, everybody. We're going to go ahead and just spoil from here on out. So if you haven't watched the movie yet, it is really good. Don't listen to these chuckleheads. Go check it out. Changed the whole world of cinema, even though, it's a small Italian movie from 1970. You don't get Michael Myers without this movie. Just saying. Very important to have this movie in between. Anyway, from here on out, we're going to spoil the ending. And, of course, the ending is that she was dead the whole time.
Dun dun dun
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, is that the next scene in Naked Violence? Is that what we just did?
Oh, wait, did you just reveal?
Oh, my gosh.
You didn't even hear what he just said?
I'm joking.
So, the big twist, Mrs. Rainieri was trying to kill her husband in the opening scene, not the other way around. But you sexist people assume that every man is trying to kill every woman. But I mean, that's what we all assumed, right? Dude with a knife and a trench
Sam
coat.
was dead the whole time.
Wow, Travis really wasn't listening.
Damn.
Yeah, he really wasn't
I
listening.
thought that was the twist.
Oh, my God.
Sam was dead the whole time.
Okay, are his cans working? I can't tell. So
he was looking at his phone.
My cans.
So the thing...
You leave my cans out of this.
The thing is, they do a good job in a lot of scenes. If you're paying attention, you can see some hair kind of haloed around certain times. The build of the killer is never substantial. They do a good job of keeping... Now, granted, some of the prime suspects are also pretty slim, but, they don't cheat. You're not going to see in certain scenes like, oh, hey, it's a 6'8" guy, obviously oversized. They keep it consistent. There really isn't a lot of cheating in this movie. The one thing that I do want to do, and I never have taken the time to do it, they mention in the final psychiatric breakdown. That's It's pretty good. Psychiatric breakdown. Come on. They mention in that final scene that the husband, by being exposed to his wife, also somehow became homicidal. And I don't think you need that. I don't know why that's there, because you can blame most of the killings on her and the rest of the killings on him protecting her. So it kind of makes me want to go back and scorecard it and see how many times she was the killer and how many times he was the killer, and see if there's some that maybe I could attribute to either one to kind of up his kill count a little bit. It seemed like an out-of-place, unnecessary item in a pretty tight little scene to be like, oh yeah, and also he's fucking crazy. And I'm like, does he have to be?
Well,
so I never even took I thought he was just covering for her.
That's one of my big problems, man. Like, well, it was obviously him who tried to kill Sam on the street in front of the old lady.
Yes.
Because it wasn't her. She was in the hospital at the time, so it had to be him. That was one of the things that, at first they point to Carlo, right?
And they kind of keep coming back to Carlo. He's always, he's the guy you expect to be the twist ending. And they build him in that way where he's at the beginning, he's a red herring, and then he's good again. But then you're like, oh, it's been him this whole time.
Yeah, so you think it's him towards the end, and then it's the husband, Mr. Ranieri or whatever their name is. Then it's the husband. He confesses to all the killings, and then he dies. And then you realize that Sam's girlfriend left with Carlo.
Yep.
And I'm like, but hold on. Why? Like, they're still teasing Carlo, even though this other guy confessed to it. Why would this other guy confess to it? There's got to be something else going on here.
Right.
Why did this guy confess? Okay, all right, just keep watching. You keep watching, and then they tease Carlo again in the room. He's holding the knife, but you don't know that until a second or two later that he's got a knife in the back of his neck, right? So they tease him again then, and he's dead, and then they reveal who the... So what I'm thinking is, you don't even need the husband. I think the movie would have been better just leave the husband's confession and all that shit out. Right? And the only thing that he did was try to cover for his wife trying to kill Sam on the street. That's the only thing that he should have done.
But you have to take into account audience expectations, right? They expect the twist to be another male, so they build it up to be a twist that never delivers, and then you twist on the twist. It's playing with the expectations of an Italian audience in 1970, where they assume another male will be the killer.
When we got to that point, I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if it was the blonde?
The girlfriend?
Sam's girlfriend. If they somehow twist that, if they just tweak the story enough to where she could have been the killer when she got taken, but then once they finally show her tied up underneath the couch, then I knew that wasn't going to happen. But they kind of made it so it might have been her just because she fled the scene as well. Maybe the two girls are working together, something like that.
Well, she's also like a prime victim, so if you think the killer's Carlo takes her, and you're like, oh, he's going to kill her. Because if Carlo's the guy, she's a prime victim for this killer. A female, young,
because
blonde,
Sam
whatever.
Witnessed the attempted murder, making the blonde working with the redhead would have been cool too, and not the husband. The husband just kind of tried to cover for her at the end. He knew about it.
Right.
And confessing would have taken them off her trail.
Right.
But the two girls working together, that probably would have been cool too. Because she's kind of surveilling Sam.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
It would have been a totally different movie, but yeah.
One of the things that makes these jollies so interesting and fun for me is you get to play along the whole time. So many modern movies, American movies, especially like the Sherlock Holmes movie that came out 10 years ago with Iron Man, Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. There is a mystery, but they don't give you enough to try to play along in any legitimate way. You're just kind of along for the roller coaster ride. And then in one scene, they're just like, you're too stupid to figure this out, so let me tell you all the stuff that you would have seen if we showed it to you, but we didn't because we hate you, audience. And now you see how smart I am, and I figured it out. This movie, and a lot of these jolly, the ones that play it straight, if you're paying attention and if you're playing the game, you're going to fall for the wrong one because they've manipulated you in a correct way. But it's satisfying because you're playing the game until they eliminate your favorite character. And then you're like, oh, my suspect's gone. On to the next one, right? It's a game of Clue.
Right.
And it's so much fun if you let it be fun.
And that's why I kept referring to, like, I was feeling more the 80s type whodunit feeling than the more modern ones. Like, I even had a quick feeling of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
You didn't really know who framed him, and they kept kind of giving you these different characters and aspects, and is it this person, is it this person? They made you think at one point it was Jessica Rabbit, like all these different things. It was totally film noir. I wouldn't say Giallo, but it was pretty. Now after watching Plumage, I'm sure there was some reference and or homage to that with Roger Rabbit and Jessica Rabbit looking the way she does with the flowing red hair.
There's certainly some shared heritage, if nothing else,
Yeah. So I think the 80s were paying attention a lot more than now.
So
definitely. Although Knives Out is pretty good.
Knives Out is good, but it still doesn't give you enough to go on. Like, you're not going to guess the ending of Knives Out unless you've seen it before. Part of that is because of the perspective of the storyteller. Like, the narrative itself is so confined versus this one where you're kind of third person over the shoulder of Sam the whole time, so you can see more than he sees. Whereas I felt like Knives Out, it's very much first person, like you're experiencing it along with your main character, which is fine. It's a different style. It's not my favorite, but it was certainly better than Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
I hate that movie.
Well, see, that's interesting because I didn't mind Sherlock Holmes, and I even like the series, the Sherlock Holmes series with
Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch. I think maybe the Cumberbatch one might give you more to go on. I liked Sherlock Holmes, but I hated Signs for that reason.
Okay.
Like, Signs, the end came together, and I think I've talked about this before, but the end comes together, and yes, they took things earlier in the movie that you saw and kind of pieced them together to help Mel Gibson defeat the aliens, but they're not things that you should have seen.
Right.
I like movies that give you the things that you should have seen, but you didn't. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
this movie makes me appreciate Clue a lot more now. I'm going to watch it on a totally different level because they do all that stuff, and it's a comedy, but it's the whodunit part of it is.
I'm going to have to see Clue.
Yes, you will.
Yeah,
you definitely will. I recommend it.
Tell me your thoughts when you see the painting.
That's an odd painting. I forgot to bring up the painter.
Oh my gosh, you mean my college roommate?
He wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't in my notes. I think it was one of those things where I didn't take notes because I just couldn't look away because it was like a car wreck.
Yeah,
like so
it's
terrible.
Insane. It's insanity.
It's funny. Like, he puts the ladder out the window and like Sam climbs up it, and then they don't take the ladder in, so like anyone can come in. Also,
like Dirty Harry.
Yeah, when he was going up the ladder, I said, if that apartment isn't long enough to house that ladder, I'm gonna freak the fuck out. Like, because it was a long ass ladder.
I was waiting for Hot Mary and her boobs to come out.
Oh, Hot Mary.
Hot Mary. Oh man. But anyway.
So
So the painting, it was obviously painted by someone who was deranged. When I first saw it, I was like, this person's not right in the head. I thought the painter was the killer, and maybe the painter went into the shop to buy their own painting so that nobody else would, so they
Why
wouldn't put
isn't
it together.
the painter the killer? Do we know who the painter is? Maybe the woman painted that. She does work in an art gallery, right? Maybe that's her painting.
But you meet the painter. He's a crazy guy. He eats cats.
Do we though?
Oh my god. Yeah, no, we totally do.
I don't know.
Is it we don't even know if it's Jason moment?
Yeah.
So the reason I wanted to bring it up, when I first saw this movie, that was one thing to me that just screamed like no budget. Like, you got these great scenes because they're in, Turin, Italy, and it's beautiful. And then you see this painting, you're like, oh, you had $10 to make a painting. But I'm not an art guy, and as I've told you on this show before, I really kind of wish I was, because it informs so much of what we watch. And if you don't know the stuff, Like the Francis Bacon thing. I didn't know anything he'd ever done except for the Batman thing. And now it's like, oh, now I've looked him up. I'm like, oh, wow.
Total set design from his paintings. Well, see, I've been aware of that for when I was growing up. I learned about H.R. Geiger, who his artwork inspired numerous movies, and that kind of drew me to that profession. When you see somebody's drawing or whatever, totally creates an entire character just by one painting.
So,
or one, a whole set, a whole feel of a movie is based on one painting. I love that stuff.
So for 15 years, I've been saying to people who will listen, God, why does anybody listen to me? Just kidding. I'm smart. Just kidding. I'm doing like a Kristen Wiig bit at this point. Just kidding. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so for years, I've said to people, if I remade Bird with Crystal Plumage, the first thing I would do is just get a way better, just sadistic, scary piece of art and just make that the centerpiece. What I didn't realize, have you guys ever heard of Peter, Pieter, Peter Bruegel? He has a piece of art called Hunters in the Snow.
I've heard the name before.
Now, I've just been recently made aware of this picture, but if you look at the art style, I shared it on our Facebook group today as a tease for what we were doing.
Okay.
It is very reminiscent of the art style as well. It blew me away the first time I saw it. I highly recommend anybody search for it. I'm sending it to you via our chat.
Yeah, I saw it, and I'm looking at it again.
When you think of that perspective,
refresher
from the painting in this movie, in this context, maybe it isn't that cheap a painting. It's just an art style I didn't expect because I don't have enough experience in fine art to understand what I'm looking at.
Yeah, if I were to remake this movie, I would get a more impressive bird.
You really
or I would
this
just
bird.
rename the movie.
So, did you guys know we talked about borrowing liberally? I'm not ignoring you. I'm adding to your point.
No, I gotcha.
So, we talked about how there's referencing, and then there's like stealing wholesale, and Travis doesn't like the stealing wholesale. Well, let me tell you about this movie, Stealing Wholesale, from a book and a movie called The Screaming Mimi. Have you ever heard of The Screaming Mimi? Because I certainly hadn't.
No, it's like she's on like Drew Carey, right?
So essentially the book is a mystery book. It's pretty much the plot of this movie. And instead of a painting, it's a statue that sets her off on a murder spree. And it's the Screaming Mimi statue is what makes this lady go crazy and start killing people. And they think it's a dude, but it's really a chick. Spoiler alert for a movie that you're never going to watch. But you should. I'm told. I haven't watched it yet. I hear it's good. Anyway, if you go back and look at this scene in the antique shop, he's defensively holding a candelabra to kind of keep the not racist store owner. God, that's a funny line. Keep the store owner away from him. Keep a safe distance from the close talker. The candelabra he's holding is shaped sort of like a Screaming Mimi statue. So you've got like this very subtle, like Argento tipping his hat to be like, hey, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I stole that thing for that. Nobody catches that because nobody's heard of Screaming Mimi, but it's a good way. It's actually kind of a good move because it's like, I totally stole your thing and didn't pay for it, but I left you a little breadcrumb so you know that I did it. So I won't deny it, but like, I like that move. That's a good move.
Gotcha.
Did you guys like Anton Segura in a Union jacket?
Union jacket?
The hitman guy. He's very much.
Oh yeah. Anton.
Yeah.
The hitman.
Not a handsome
in
fellow.
A Union jacket.
But he's got his boxer's Union jacket. That's.
Oh. The fighter.
The fighter guy who lives in the same porno shack from Dirty Harry.
Yeah, they can't shoot a gun and like shoots randomly and can't catch up with a regular person that's trying to run away.
Well,
like,
he's a clone of Django Fett,
hitman.
and so his accuracy's a little off.
Django Fett.
He's got that voice. Love it. Can we talk about the trap that she sets at the end?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That artwork
yes.
with spikes that are apparently in the correct shape of his body so he doesn't get impaled by any of them.
I mean, that's a bit of a reach.
Lucky, I guess.
Yeah, it's Let me tell you.
When they lift it up, I'm like, all those spikes are on that side too.
Yeah.
They're not only. I thought maybe they were only on the right side, and he was laying on the left. But then when they lifted it up, there were spikes on the right side too, and he didn't catch any of them.
He just got lucky.
Yeah, in my remake, he takes
if
one
there
in
was
the
no
leg or
spikes,
something.
he just would have been crushed.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
can we talk about her, that scene, since we're in spoiler territory? The sexual nature of her behavior on top of him with that phallic knife. I mean, this movie is not as graceful as Psycho, but I think it does a similar thing, right? It handles kind of edgy topics in a way that age better than you'd expect them to for a movie from 1970.
Certainly.
Her acting in that scene, for an actress who doesn't do a whole lot in this movie, she personifies the attacker that she dealt with so well, right? She Tommy Jasons it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And her commitment to be like a sexual, almost male role with this phallic knife, I mean, she goes for it and she nails it, man. Very cool scene.
Agreed.
Very cool.
She reminded me of Dana Zool.
Yeah, a little bit.
From Ghostbusters, like when she's like, there is no Dana, only Zool scene.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like that grin she had and the face and the makeup and the hair, it was totally overacted, but obviously she was playing from another mental state, so it's fine.
I mean, if you imagine...
Which, it was very Joker-esque.
It's very, it's difficult to diagram verbally, but, she is playing how she interpreted the behavior of her attacker. So it's, her doing a caricature of a traumatic event and doing it in such a way that it communicates to him what she felt, even though it's probably way over the top compared to what would have actually happened. But it's really, there's a lot of meat there for a movie that has a gray bird instead of a crystal bird.
Yeah.
And I found it funny, like you guys brought it up when Troy was on, how the American slasher, the slasher is just unstoppable, unkillable.
Mm-hmm.
And she takes a karate chop to the back of the head and it's done.
Yeah, because she's human, man.
Yeah, chop.
Well,
over.
I said something.
Yeah,
well,
no, we can't.
I won't
but I know
say
what you're talking about, George, but we can't.
Yeah,
no, exactly.
You know what movie I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's, it brings it all back home to the Halloween thing, because you expect Halloween always, because it's so...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't expect her to be indestructible, but I just thought it was funny, like... that
she goes out like a wuss.
Well, she kind of pulls a Boba Fett, like... and she does go out like a punk.
Judo chop.
Just a little chop. And that was it.
You remember back in Friday the 13th when Alice takes a nap in the third act, and I complained about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
How could I forget about that?
But then you've got Susie Kendall in this one, falling asleep and waking up after her traumatic attack, and I'm just like, man, I guess that's just the thing people did after this movie, is they were like, oh, hey, I'm being attacked. The stress, I now sleep. It's very strange. It won't be...
It was cut in a way where it was almost implying a dream.
Yeah.
Like they edited that to the point where they wanted you to think that attack didn't happen and she was having a dream.
Yeah.
Even though it did happen.
Yeah.
I will tell you, this is not the last
purpose.
time you're going to see Susie Kendall fall asleep in a movie. That's as much as I'm going to tell you. And hopefully you forget I said it by the time we watch whatever movie I'm referring to.
You're referring to it, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait till we watch that American movie that I can't tell you the name of because it'll give it away. But the one that steals the ending of Naked Violence and also the scene from this movie just wholesale, because you're going to see it and you're going to be like, why have I seen this before? And then we'll talk about it and you'll be like, oh, damn it. Dan told me it was going to happen and it did.
Is that this season or next season?
I haven't.
You can't tell me. Okay.
Yeah, I can't. Right. I can't tell you because if I tell you, because you probably don't. We're just gonna. I can't wait. I'm very excited.
We'll do it on the night.
Oh my god.
On the night, you'll know on the night.
It's hard to coordinate when you're both kind of on the other side of this because I don't have my guy to bounce stuff off of because you're both on that side. It's fine.
Yeah, we suck.
Hey, but bring in the perverts. Right? One of the funniest lines in the movie.
Bring in the perverts.
And then for them to be very, Silence of the Lambs and Psycho and be like, oh, no. transvestites are not perverts. We want the perverts. You know, that's a good.
Right. Yeah, that's funny.
For 1970, that is a good nuanced approach. You know, for in the same era as Dirty Harry, right? A lot more nuance.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I think? My big problem with The Bird. I'm kind of psychoanalyzing myself.
You're on this bird, man.
We just watched a movie, Silence of the Lambs, where I was so impressed by the title and how they got to the title of that movie. So impressed by it, and then juxtapose that to the bird in this movie. I think that's why maybe I'm so upset.
Just that?
Yeah, just that.
Just that.
Anyways, I'm just psychoanalyzing myself. It's fine.
Fa la 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 la.
Keep going.
Well, thank you for watching a movie that is very much more an Italian-focused Giallo, rather than one necessarily meant to sell in America, right? By Deep Red, they know where the money's at, and they're making English actors speak English, and they're doing a whole different thing. But this one, his debut, it's very much rooted in a context that you guys just aren't in. So I'm happy that you made it through. Yeah. 5 years from now, when I've made you watch 100 Jolly, you're going to go back to this and be like, man, that is good. And I have seen that, everything we've watched since. But I get it. But I still think everybody out there that enjoys any of the 80s slashers and wants to know more about where Halloween comes from, Deep Red and this are two very, very influential pieces.
You know what's funny? Like I don't know if you were wrapping up or not, but when I hear about Crystal Plumage, everybody says it's iconic horror film. I didn't feel any horror. It was a thriller. It was a murder mystery. It was all that. But because I'm so American, I guess, I didn't see it as a horror film. There was nothing horrible about it.
Yeah,
there was nothing scary. There was nothing. It was just mysterious, and it was thought-provoking, and whodunit, all that stuff. But I personally wouldn't put this in a horror genre at all. Like when I see,
it's more like suspense.
Yeah, like when you see clips of Suspiria, you understand why that fits into the horror genre, because it just has imagery and a plot that it fits.
Mm-hmm.
But you think of a movie like Hellraiser or whatever, that's a horror movie which has a lot of the context of these Giallo films, but it's done in a horror feel. So you see the horror, you understand the horror. It's a horror movie.
Yeah.
But these I don't feel like they're horror movies.
Yeah, and I think that's part
of
it's a failure of nuance on the part of whoever is calling it a horror movie, right? What they're trying to say, and they're doing so, I guess, ineloquently. What they're trying to say is, it's a proto-slasher hybrid of a mystery and a thriller. So when they point at, well, what is a slasher movie? Well, at Blockbuster, they were in the horror section. Okay, so if a slasher movie is a horror movie and this inspires a slasher movie, then that must also be a horror movie. I can count on one hand the Giallos that actually have frightening elements that you would associate with an Omen, a Rosemary's Baby, any of these standard horrific horror movies, rather than the slashery violent ones, when really Giallos for the most part are mysteries, thrillers. Some are sexy, some are like abhorrently violent and malicious, and some the sleazier ones kind of border on trash,
snuff,
but they're not scary. They're not scary necessarily, unless of course you are easily triggered by razor blades and knives, in which case these are probably hard to watch. Like, if you are a person who has suffered violence or been around someone who suffered violence from an edged weapon, you're not going to want to watch this movie. It is not going to be fun, because it's a lot of slashing. And it's not necessarily like high five your buddy, woo, that was cool gore slashing either. It's personal.
Real. It's realistic.
Yeah.
It tries to be, yeah.
It's domestic, almost.
Yeah.
People are, minus the trench coat and the fedora, people are going through this every day.
Well, and that's one thing that I love about this movie, that you have to see more of the Bava stuff to know why it's significant. But the Bava stuff all happens in small contained areas. You know, it's in an apartment, it's in a fashion house, it's in a fashion house, it's in a fashion house. I mean, that just covers 3 different movies, but you get my point.
He's got a problem with models.
There's each one's a different take on the same thing, but there's 3 in fashion houses. 2 in fashion houses, 1 in a gothic castle that could be a fashion house, whatever. And then, of course, Bay of Blood. It takes place in a bay, right? But Crystal Plumage takes place in the entire city of Turin. And yet it's still contained to this small group, but it could be anybody in the city, right? It really just ups the scale a little bit. Oh, it's a cool movie. I don't know if it's the best movie, but it's important as hell, and it's just cool. They're doing stuff here that's never been done, and every movie after it in Italy is going to try to steal something from it because it made money, and that's really the key. Whether or not you think it's artistically an improvement over Bava, it made money, so now you got to do it too. And then all the stuff that we see in the 70s and 80s in American slashers is either influenced by this or influenced by something that came from this. The best example from that being, we were talking about Umberto Lenzi. Well, Troy's got a book coming up on Lenzi. Everything Lenzi did before Bird is sexy, right? It's like a lady, a guy, a second lady, maybe a second guy. They're in a house. There's some money. Who's going to kill whom and who's going to get laid, right? Because what Lenzi's doing is basically taking a formula from a movie from France called Diaboliques, and then he's tweaking it to be more boobies, right? Bird of Crystal Plumage comes out, and right away, Lenzi turns, and suddenly he's doing 7 Blood-Stained Orchids, which you guys watched as part of the Halloween thing. And it's a slasher movie. Because he's just, Bird, we kill people now. Okay, let's just kill a bunch of people. Turn the whole thing, man. There's your line. Crystal Plumage, 7 Blood-Stained Orchids, Halloween.
Done.
I rest my case.
I started out this podcast with, I don't understand why this is important.
And that, do you?
Yeah, I do. I do.
I rest my case. Thank you for joining us on the Remedial Film Class Podcast special Bird with the Crystal Plumage with Troy Howarth edition. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Remedial Film Pod. You can find us at facebook.com/Remedial Film Pod. We have the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Remedial Film Pod. Pretty easy to remember. You should also look up Troy Howarth. Make sure you check out his books. And check your Blu-ray collection because you probably already own something with him on it. And give it a spin. He's informative and delightful. So thanks to Troy for joining us. Thanks to you for listening to us. We'll be back in 1 week for our regular timed release of First Blood, which we hinted at pretty heavily in this episode. And then it's back to bi-weekly after that until we come up with another special episode to slip in there just to keep you on your toes. So in the meantime, head over to Amazon and pick up Murder by Design, the Unsane Cinema of Dario Argento by Troy. And keep an eye on this space for developments involving a certain spring occurrence that might be on the way. Maybe not totally dissimilar from our fall break, but maybe with a little twist. So keep an eye on the feed, and in the meantime, support your local movie geek. We'll see you next week.